Today, live February 22, 2021. World News Headlines. Bells toll for lives lost as U.S. reaches 500,000 COVID deaths. U.S. Supreme Court sets the stage for release of Trump tax returns. About a third of Texans still facing disrupted water supplies. Fauci says U.S. political divisions contributed to 500,000 dead from COVID-19. Biden administration asks U.S. Supreme Court to dump Medicaid work case. U.S. COVID-19 deaths fall for third week as cases see steep drop. Capitol riot, suspect blames right-wing media and Trump for her actions. Pfizer to ship 13 million COVID-19 vaccine doses per week to U.S. by mid-March, says executive. U.S. energy regulator to examine climate change's threat to power reliability. China calls for a reset, but U.S. says Beijing trying to avert blame. U.S. arrests wife of Mexico cartel chief El Chapo on drug charges. Italy's envoy to Congo killed in attack on UN convoy. Exclusive. U.S. plays down Iran rhetoric, waits to see if Tehran resumes talks. U.S. puts sanctions on two Myanmar generals over coup, Treasury Department. Pakistan police pop their rollerblades on to catch Karachi's criminals. Canada's parliament passes motion saying China's treatment of Uyghurs is genocide. Delays rattle asylum seekers waiting in Mexico as hopes of quick U.S. entry fade. U.S.'s Blinken stresses two-state solution to Palestinian conflict in call with Israeli minister. EU to sanction 4 Russians over Navalny, including prosecutors. Russian hockey star targeted for support of Kremlin critic Navalny, NHL team says. Burma hundreds of thousands of demonstrators, despite threats from the junta. Bells toll for lives lost as U.S. reaches 500,000 COVID deaths. New York, the United States on Monday crossed the staggering milestone of 500,000 COVID-19 deaths just over a year since the coronavirus pandemic claimed its first known victim in Santa Clara County, California. In a proclamation honoring the dead, President Joe Biden ordered the U.S. flag to be flown at half-staff on public buildings and grounds until sunset on Friday. On this solemn occasion, we reflect on their loss and on their loved ones left behind, Biden said in the proclamation. We as a nation must remember them so we can begin to heal, to unite, and find purpose as one nation to defeat this pandemic. Bells tolled at the National Cathedral in Washington to honor the lives lost, ringing 500 times to symbolize the 500,000 deaths. As we acknowledge the scale of this mass death in America, remember each person and the life they lived, Biden said in a somber speech at the White House after the bells sounded. The son who called his mom every night just to check in. The father, the daughter who lit up his world. The best friend who was always there, the nurse who made her patients want to live. A few moments later, Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris and their spouses appeared wearing black clothing and black masks. They stood silently as the hymn Amazing Grace was played. The country had recorded more than 28 million COVID-19 cases and 500,264 lives lost as of Monday afternoon, according to a Reuters tally of public health data, although daily cases and hospitalizations have fallen to the lowest level since before the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. About 19% of total global coronavirus deaths have occurred in the United States, an outsized figure given that the nation accounts for just 4% of the world's population. These numbers are stunning, Dr. Anthony Fauci, a top infectious disease advisor to President Joe Biden, told ABC's Good Morning America program. If you look back historically, we've done worse than almost any other country and we're a highly developed, rich country. In an interview with Reuters on Monday, Fauci said political divisiveness contributed significantly to the U.S. death toll. More vigilance urged. The country's poor performance reflects the lack of a unified, national response last year, when the administration of former President Donald Trump mostly left states to their own devices in tackling the greatest public health crisis in a century, with the president often in conflict with his own health experts. In 2020, the virus has taken a full year off the average life expectancy in the United States, the biggest decline since World War II. Sweeping through the country at the beginning of last year, the U.S. epidemic had claimed its first 100,000 lives by May. The death toll doubled by September as the virus ebbed and surged during the summer months. Pandemic-weary Americans, like so many around the world, grappled with the mound of loss brought by COVID-19 as health experts warned of yet another coronavirus resurgence during the fall and winter months. Americans lost mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, brothers, sisters and friends to the virus. For many, the grief was amplified by the inability to see loved ones in hospitals or nursing homes and by the physical distancing imposed by authorities to curb the virus spread. By December, the death toll had reached 300,000 in the United States. In the 3 months after Thanksgiving, the virus would claim 230,000 lives. With numbers that made the appalling toll early in the pandemic pale by comparison, deaths recorded between December and February accounted for 46% of all U.S. COVID-19 fatalities, even as vaccines finally became available and a monumental effort to inoculate the American public got started. Despite the grim milestone, the virus appears to have loosened its grip as COVID-19 cases in the United States fell for the 6th consecutive week. Health experts have warned, however, that coronavirus variants initially discovered in Britain, South Africa, and Brazil could unleash another wave that threatens to reverse the recent positive trends. In his White House remarks, Biden called on Americans to remain vigilant in fighting the pandemic by continuing to wear masks, observe social distancing, and receive vaccinations when it is their turn. U.S. Supreme Court sets the stage for release of Trump tax returns. Washington. Donald Trump suffered a major setback on Monday in his long quest to conceal details of his finances as the U.S. Supreme Court paved the way for a New York City prosecutor to obtain the former president's tax returns and other records as part of an accelerating criminal investigation. The justices without comment rebuffed Trump's request to put on hold an October 7 lower court ruling directing the Republican businessman-turned-politician's longtime accounting firm, Mazars USA, to comply with a subpoena to turn over the materials to a grand jury convened by Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance, a Democrat. The work continues, Vance said in a statement issued after the court's action. Trump issued a statement describing Vance's investigation as part of the greatest political witch hunt in the history of our country, accusing New York Democrats of expending their energy on taking down a political opponent instead of tackling violent crimes. That's fascism, not justice, and that is exactly what they are trying to do with respect to me, except that the people of our country won't stand for it, Trump added. The Supreme Court's action does not require Trump to do anything. The records involved in the dispute were requested from a third party, Mazars, not Trump himself. Vance previously told Trump's lawyers his office would be free to immediately enforce the subpoena if the justices rejected Trump's request. A Mazars spokesman said the company remains committed to fulfilling all of our professional and legal obligations. Unlike all other recent U.S. presidents, Trump refused to make his tax returns public. The data could provide details on his wealth and the activities of his family real estate company, the Trump Organization. The Supreme Court's action, which followed Vance's hiring this month of a prominent lawyer with deep experience in white-collar and organized crime cases, could boost the district attorney's investigation into the Trump Organization following a flurry of recent subpoenas. Reuters reported on Friday that Vance's office had subpoenaed a New York City property tax agency, suggesting prosecutors are examining Trump's efforts to reduce his commercial real estate taxes for possible evidence of fraud. The Supreme Court, whose 6-3 conservative majority includes 3 Trump appointees, had already ruled once in the subpoena dispute, last July rejecting Trump's broad argument that he was immune from criminal probes as a sitting president. Trump, who left office on January 20 after losing the November 3 election to Democrat Joe Biden, continues to face an array of legal issues concerning personal and business conduct. Vance subpoenaed Mazars in 2019 seeking Trump's corporate and personal tax returns from 2011 to 2018. Trump's lawyers sued to block the subpoena, arguing that a sitting president has absolute immunity from state criminal investigations. The Supreme Court in July rejected those arguments but said Trump could raise other subpoena objections. Trump's lawyers then told lower courts the subpoena was overly broad and amounted to political harassment. U.S. District Judge Victor Marrero in August and the New York-based Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in October rejected those claims. Vance's investigation initially focused on hush money paid by Trump's former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen before the 2016 election to adult film actress Stormy Daniels and former Playboy model Karen McDougal. The two women said they had sexual encounters with Trump, which he denied. In recent court filings, Vance suggested the probe is now broader and could focus on potential bank, tax and insurance fraud, as well as falsification of business records. The Supreme Court has now proclaimed that no one is above the law. Trump will, for the first time, have to take responsibility for his own dirty deeds, Cohen said in a statement. The court on Monday separately turned away Daniels' bid to revive her defamation lawsuit against Trump. In separate litigation, the Democratic-led U.S. House of Representatives is seeking similar Trump records from Mazars and Deutsche Bank. The New York Times reported last year that Trump had paid $750 in federal income taxes in both 2016 and 2017, and no income taxes in 10 of the prior 15 years, reflecting chronic business losses that he used to avoid paying taxes. Trump has disputed the Times report. About a third of Texans still facing disrupted water supplies. Some 8.8 million people in Texas, about a third of the state's population, still had issues with their water supply as of early Monday, authorities told Reuters, after a record-breaking freeze knocked out power stations last week. Millions of Texans are still being advised to boil water before using, though all power plants were back online over the weekend and power had been restored to most homes as the weather returned to normal. Officials in Houston, the biggest city in the state, said water there was safe to use without boiling as of Sunday. As of 7 a.m. Central Time Monday, more than 1,200 public water systems have reported disruptions in service due to the weather, many of them leading to boil water notices. This is affecting more than 8.8 million people in 199 Texas counties, a Texas Commission on Environmental Quality (TCEQ) spokesman said in an emailed statement. A total of 147 PWSs serving a population of just under 120,000 people are non-operational. In addition, 8 PWS's wastewater treatment facilities have reported as non-operational, the spokesman added. Texas Governor Greg Abbott said late on Sunday that he had joined the Texas Air Guard, the Texas National Guard and the U.S. military to distribute water. About 3.5 million bottles of water have been delivered, the governor said in a tweet. A deadly winter storm caused widespread blackouts last week across Texas, a state unaccustomed to extreme cold, killing at least 24 people and knocking out power to more than 4 million people at its peak. Texas is also bringing in plumbers from out of state to help repair burst pipes, the governor said on Sunday. Homeowners or renters who do not have insurance may be able to seek reimbursement from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, he said. U.S. President Joe Biden approved a major disaster declaration for Texas on Saturday that makes federal funding available to people harmed by the storm, including assistance for temporary housing and home repairs and low-cost loans. U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said late on Sunday that she had amassed $5 million in her fundraising efforts to help Texans hard hit by last week's winter storm. Fauci says U.S. political divisions contributed to 500,000 dead from COVID-19. Chicago, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, said political divisiveness contributed significantly to the stunning U.S. COVID-19 death toll, which on Monday surpassed 500,000 lives lost. The country had recorded more than 28 million COVID-19 cases and 500,054 fatalities as of Monday afternoon, according to a Reuters tally of public health data. In an interview with Reuters, Fauci on Monday said the pandemic arrived in the United States as the country was riven by political divisions in which wearing a mask became a political statement rather than a public health measure. Even under the best of circumstances, this would have been a very serious problem, Fauci said, noting that despite strong adherence to public health measures, countries such as Germany and the UK struggled with the virus. However, that does not explain how a rich and sophisticated country can have the most percentage of deaths and be the hardest hit country in the world, said Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and a top advisor to President Joe Biden. That I believe should not have happened. While the United States has just about 4% of the global population, it has recorded nearly 20% of all COVID-19 deaths. This is the worst thing that's happened to this country with regard to the health of the nation in over 100 years, Fauci said, adding that decades from now, people will be talking about that horrible year of 2020 and maybe 2021. For most of 2020, Fauci served on then-President Donald Trump's White House Coronavirus Task Force, a job that often put him at odds with the president, who sought to downplay the severity of pandemic despite contracting COVID-19 himself and refused to issue a national mask mandate. Trump at times even attacked Fauci's credibility, undermining his public health messaging. The nation's failure cannot all be laid at the feet of Donald Trump, Fauci said. But the lack of involvement at the very top of the leadership in trying to do everything that was science-based was clearly detrimental to the effort. His personal low point came when several states and cities disregarded the task force's phased recommendations for how to safely reopen the country after spring lockdowns. He called that disregard by several governors and mayors incomprehensible to me, when you could see right in front of your eyes what was happening. When the American spirit is so divided, that really made me sad, he said. Fauci said the emergence of more contagious variants of the coronavirus, especially ones from South Africa and Brazil that have been shown to reduce the immunity from natural infections and vaccines, have made it challenging to predict when the nation will be able to put the pandemic behind it. Fauci and Biden have said the United States should return to something approaching pre-pandemic normal life around Christmas. That could change, he cautioned. The variants also change the equation when it comes to herd immunity, in which a population becomes protected from infection because of high levels of immunity from vaccines or infections. Asked whether that is still achievable, Fauci said, "I think we can get herd immunity at least against getting sick." Biden administration asks U.S. Supreme Court to dump Medicaid work case. Washington President Joe Biden's administration on Monday asked the U.S. Supreme Court to cancel an upcoming oral argument on a policy introduced under his predecessor Donald Trump backing work requirements for people who receive health care under the Medicaid program for the poor. Acting Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar said the Biden administration has started the process of reversing the previous policy and asked the justices to dump the scheduled March 29 arguments concerning pilot programs adopted by the states of Arkansas and New Hampshire. Under Trump, the Department of Health and Human Services in 2018 approved the pilot projects in those two states as part of a push to put a conservative stamp on Medicaid, a program that was expanded under the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, to provide coverage to millions more Americans. Prelogar asked the justices to consider throwing out the pending cases altogether. Biden, a Democrat, succeeded Trump, a Republican, on January 20. Under Biden, the same department made a preliminary finding that work requirements would be inconsistent with the objectives of Medicaid, which provides medical insurance for the poor, Prelogar told the court. The justices in December agreed to hear Trump administration appeals of rulings by a lower court that deemed the work requirement programs unlawful. The lower court noted that about a quarter of the people subject to the requirement lost their Medicaid coverage in the first 5 months after the Arkansas work requirement was implemented. The Supreme Court on February 3 canceled oral arguments in 2 other cases after the Biden administration changed course from Trump policies. Both were appeals by Trump's administration, one defending his funding of the U.S.-Mexico border wall and the other defending his so-called Remain in Mexico asylum policy. Trump in 2019 redirected $2.5 billion from military counter-narcotics programs for border wall construction in California, New Mexico, and Arizona. Biden issued a proclamation on his first day in office ordering a freeze on border wall projects and directing a review of the legality of its funding and contracting methods. The Remain in Mexico policy has forced tens of thousands of migrants to wait in Mexico, rather than entering the United States, while their asylum claims are processed. U.S. COVID-19 deaths fall for third week as cases see steep drop. Deaths from COVID-19 in the United States fell for a third straight week last week, as cases and hospitalizations both showed steep drops. The positive trends come as the U.S. death toll from the pandemic hit 500,000, though health experts have warned about a possible resurgence in cases due to new and more contagious variants of the coronavirus. Deaths linked to COVID-19 fell 37% in the week ended February 21 to 13,636, according to a Reuters analysis of U.S. state and county reports. Excluding a backlog of deaths reported by Ohio in the prior week, deaths on an adjusted basis fell 17%. The country reported more than 491,000 new cases last week, but that was down 23% from the previous 7 days. New cases have fallen for 6 straight weeks and are down 72% from their peak in early January. Compared to the previous week, new cases rose in only 7 out of 50 states. However, with the country logging 70,000 new cases on average per day, residents may be wearing masks into 2022, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert, told CNN last week. That's still a very high level of virus in the community, he said. The average number of COVID-19 patients in U.S. hospitals fell 17% to 61,400 last week, the lowest since mid-November, according to a Reuters analysis of data from the volunteer-run COVID tracking project. Nationally, 5.3% of COVID-19 tests came back positive for the virus, the lowest level since the week ended October 18, according to data from the COVID tracking project. The positive test rate remained above 20% in 4 states, South Dakota, Kansas, Alabama, and Idaho. Capitol riot suspect blames right-wing media and Trump for her actions. A suspect charged in the January 6 U.S. Capitol riot partially blamed the right-wing media for her actions, as conservative news outlets face accusations that they spread misinformation ahead of the violence that left 5 people dead. In a motion for release to home confinement pending the outcome of her case, filed Saturday, Jessica Watkins said she fell prey to the false and inflammatory claims of the former president, his supporters, and the right-wing media. She did not identify the media outlets by name or give more details about what the claims were that led her to take part in the protest. Watkins, a leader of the far-right Oath Keepers group, has been charged with conspiring to storm the Capitol to prevent Congress from certifying President Joe Biden's election victory. She has pleaded not guilty to the conspiracy charges. The role the media may have played ahead of the Capitol siege has faced criticism in some quarters. On Monday, 2 Democratic U.S. lawmakers sent letters to a dozen cable, satellite, and streaming video companies urging them to address their disseminating misinformation to millions of users from some channels. The letter said right-wing media outlets like Newsmax, One America News Network, OANN, and Fox News all aired misinformation about the November 2020 elections. On Wednesday, the House Committee on Energy and Commerce is holding a hearing on traditional media's role in promoting disinformation and extremism. Watkins' motion states that after the riots took place, she also believed the right-wing media's assertions that the violence was perpetrated by Antifa or others. As part of their January 6 coverage, conservative media outlets at times cast doubt on the identities of the rioters. Hosts and guests on all networks condemned the violence. A spokesman from Newsmax wrote in a statement, Newsmax reported on the events in Washington, D.C., as they unfolded and continually condemned any violence and illegal behavior. We never diminished the severity of the actions undertaken by those who entered the Capitol building. Owen said, when government officials want to silence media, especially media that shines a light on their false narratives, it's nothing short of an attack on our democracy and freedom of press. Representatives from Fox News did not reply to requests for comment on Watkins' assertions. Earlier, Fox said in response to the lawmakers' letter that for lawmakers to tell distributors to engage in viewpoint discrimination sets a terrible precedent. Pfizer to ship 13 million COVID-19 vaccine doses per week to U.S. by mid-March, says executive. Pfizer Incorporated expects to deliver more than 13 million doses of its COVID-19 vaccine per week to the United States by the middle of March, more than doubling its shipments from early February, a top Pfizer executive said in prepared testimony ahead of a Tuesday congressional hearing. Pfizer has shipped around 40 million doses to locations across the United States so far and is on track to deliver 120 million doses of its 2-dose regimen by the end of March, said John Young, Pfizer's chief business officer. He added that Pfizer is also prepared to provide a total of 300 million shots to the United States by the end of July and has raised global production expectations for 2021 to at least 2 billion doses. In his own prepared remarks, Moderna Incorporated President Stephen Hoge said the drugmaker plans to deliver 100 million doses of its 2-dose shot by the end of March and 300 million by the end of July. Johnson & Johnson believes it will be able to ship at least 20 million doses of its single-dose shot to the United States by the end of March after receiving U.S. regulatory authorization, said Vice President of Medical Affairs Richard Nettles. It expects to ship 100 million doses by mid-year 2021, it said. The drugmaker's remarks put the United States on track to receive 240 million doses by the end of March, enough to inoculate 130 million Americans, and 700 million doses by mid-year, more than enough to dose the entire U.S. population. The comments were prepared ahead of a U.S. congressional hearing on vaccine availability to be held by the House Committee on Energy and Commerce on Tuesday. U.S. energy regulator to examine climate change's threat to power reliability. Washington U.S. federal energy regulators said on Monday they will examine threats that climate change and extreme weather events pose to the country's electric reliability in the wake of last week's deadly Texas freeze that left millions of people without power. The effects of climate change are already apparent, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission Chairman Richard Glick said in a statement. We must do everything we can within our statutory authority to ensure that the electric grid is capable of keeping the lights on in the face of extreme weather. FERC, which regulates the interstate transmission of electricity, oil and natural gas and approves fossil fuel projects such as pipelines, could play a big role in President Joe Biden's promise to make the power grid emissions-free by 2035. It was not immediately clear how FERC, a panel of 5 commissioners which has a 3-2 Republican majority until about June, can keep power delivery reliable in an age of extreme weather events. In California last August, a crushing heat wave led to rolling blackouts for 2 days. A decade ago, after a milder Texas cold snap led to power outages, FERC probed ways to protect the grid and wrote recommendations for winterization of natural gas and other installations. We followed up on those for a couple of years, but actual implementation was in the hands primarily of the Texas authorities who run the grid, and as memories faded, most of those steps were not taken. Former FERC Chair Cheryl LaFleur told Reuters in a video interview here. She said the severity of last week's freeze, which killed at least 24 people, should prompt a stronger response. Earlier this month, Glick, a Democrat, said FERC will create the panel's first position to oversee environmental justice. The person will ensure that FERC decisions do not unfairly hurt historically marginalized communities with pollution, he said. Market manipulation. The Commission also said its enforcement office is examining wholesale natural gas and electricity market activity to see whether an investigation is necessary on market manipulation or other violations during the Texas frigid snap. Wholesale power prices in the state soared more than 300-fold, stirring memories of price spikes that accompanied California's energy crisis of 2000 to 2001, when Enron and others artificially boosted prices. On Saturday, U.S. Senator Tina Smith wrote to regulators, including FERC, calling for an investigation of any price gouging by natural gas producers and suppliers. Spot prices in some cases rose to nearly 100 times usual levels. FERC's surveillance office identifies any potentially anti-competitive or manipulative behavior to determine whether investigations are appropriate. FERC also screens daily and monthly trading at most U.S. physical and financial natural gas trading hubs in the organized and bilateral wholesale electricity markets, and may work with other federal agencies on the review, it said. China calls for a reset, but U.S. says Beijing trying to avert blame. Beijing, Washington. Senior Chinese diplomat Wang Yi said on Monday the United States and China could work together on various issues if they repaired their damaged bilateral relations, but Washington accused Beijing of trying to avert blame for its actions. Wang, a Chinese state counselor and foreign minister, said Beijing stood ready to reopen constructive dialogue after ties sank to their lowest in decades under former President Donald Trump. But he urged Washington to respect China's core interests, stop smearing the ruling Communist Party, stop interfering in Beijing's internal affairs, and stop conniving with separatist forces for Taiwan's independence. He called on the United States to remove tariffs on Chinese goods and abandon what he said was an irrational suppression of the Chinese tech sector. In response, State Department spokesman Ned Price told reporters, his comments reflect a continued pattern of Beijing's tendency to avert blame for its predatory economic practices, its lack of transparency, its failure to honor its international agreements, and its repression of universal human rights. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters separately that the United States viewed the relationship with China as one of strong competition. Before Wang spoke at a forum sponsored by the Foreign Ministry, officials played footage of the ping-pong diplomacy of 1972 when an exchange of table tennis players cleared the way for then U.S. President Richard Nixon to visit China. Over the past few years, the United States basically cut off bilateral dialogue at all levels, Wang said in prepared remarks translated into English. We stand ready to have candid communication with the U.S. side, and engage in dialogues aimed at solving problems. Wang pointed to a recent call between Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden as a positive step. Biden succeeded Trump as president on January 20. Washington and Beijing have clashed on multiple fronts, including trade, accusations of human rights crimes against the Uyghur Muslim minorities in the Xinjiang region, and Beijing's territorial claims in the resources-rich South China Sea. The Biden administration has signaled it will maintain pressure on Beijing. The president has voiced concern about China's coercive and unfair trade practices, and endorsed a Trump administration determination that China has committed genocide in Xinjiang. Confronting China is one of the few areas where Democrats and Republicans in the U.S. Congress find common ground. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, in a statement on China's crackdown on the once semi-autonomous Hong Kong, on Monday urged considering strict consequences for Beijing. The Chinese government must know that the world is watching its strangulation of human rights, and that we must put all options on the table for holding China accountable, said Pelosi, a Democrat. U.S. arrests wife of Mexico cartel chief El Chapo on drug charges. Washington and the wife of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the imprisoned former leader of Mexico's Sinaloa drug cartel, was arrested on Monday over her alleged involvement in international drug trafficking, the U.S. Department of Justice said. Emma Coronel Ashpuro, 31, a regular attendee at her husband's trial 2 years ago, was arrested at Dulles International Airport in Northern Virginia, and is expected to appear in a federal court in Washington on Tuesday. A lawyer for Coronel could not immediately be identified. It was unclear why Coronel, a dual U.S.-Mexico citizen, was in the Washington area. Coronel's arrest came 2 years after a celebrated trial in Brooklyn where Guzman, now 63, was convicted of trafficking tons of drugs into the United States as Sinaloa's leader, where prosecutors said he amassed power through murders and wars with rival cartels. He was sentenced in July 2019 to life in prison plus 30 years, which the sentencing judge said reflected Guzman's overwhelmingly evil actions. Guzman was sent to ADX Florence in Colorado, the nation's most secure supermax prison. Coronel was charged in a one-count complaint with conspiring to distribute heroin, cocaine, marijuana and methamphetamines for unlawful importation into the United States. Prosecutors said Coronel also conspired to aid her husband in his July 2015 escape from the Altiplano prison in Mexico, when he dug a mile-long tunnel from his cell and began plotting a second escape following his capture by Mexican authorities in January 2016. U.S. and Mexican efforts to fight drug trafficking had become strained when the Justice Department brought drug charges in October against former Mexican Defense Minister Salvador Cienfuegos. The Justice Department unexpectedly dropped that case the following month and let Cienfuegos return to Mexico, in a bid to restore trust in the country's security ties. Cienfuegos was exonerated 2 months later when Mexico dropped its own case. Thomas Guevara, an investigator in security issues at the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, said Coronel's arrest might be part of a pressure strategy to prompt cooperation from Guzman. A Mexican official familiar with Coronel's case, who asked not to be identified, said her arrest appeared to be solely a U.S. initiative, and that Coronel was not wanted in Mexico. Italy's envoy to Congo killed in attack on UN convoy. Goma, Democratic Republic of Congo. Italy's ambassador to Democratic Republic of Congo was killed on Monday along with his bodyguard and a World Food Program driver when their convoy was attacked in the east of the country, Italy and the United Nations said. The assailants stopped the convoy by firing warning shots, killed the Congolese driver and were leading the passengers into the forest when park rangers opened fire, the governor of North Kivu province, Carline Zanzu-Casavita, told Reuters. The Italian ambassador, Luca Attanasio, 43, was hit in the abdomen and died several hours later at the UN hospital in the regional capital Goma, Congo's interior ministry said. Italy said Attanasio's bodyguard Vittorio Iacovacci, 30, also died in the attack. The driver was named by a security source and local rights activists as Mustafa Milambo. It was with great shock and immense sorrow that I learned of the death today of our ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo and of a Carabinieri policeman, Italian Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio said in a statement. The circumstances of this brutal attack are still unclear and no effort will be spared to shed light on what happened. There was no immediate claim of responsibility. Congo's Interior Ministry blamed a Hutu militia called the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR. It is one of dozens of armed groups operating in and around Virunga National Park, which lies along Congo's borders with Rwanda and Uganda and is home to more than half the world's mountain gorillas. The FDLR, founded by members of the militia behind the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, kidnapped 2 British tourists in the same village in May 2018, leading the park to close to tourists for 9 months. The couple were released after several days. I promise the Italian government that my country's government will do everything to discover who is behind this awful murder, Congo's Foreign Minister Marine Tumbanza said. Cleared for travel. The convoy was attacked at about 10:15 a.m., 0815 GMT, some 25 kilometers 15 miles, north of Goma, a spokesman for the Virunga National Park told Reuters. Local civil society member Mambo Kawia said it happened in the village of Rurumba. The UN's World Food Program WFP said the delegation was on its way to visit a school feeding program in Rutshuru. It said the road had previously been cleared for travel without security escorts. Photos shared on social media showed Attanasio lying in the arms of a man in a park authority jeep and the broken window of a WFP vehicle. Reuters has not verified the images. Italy's foreign ministry website said Attanasio had been its head of mission in Congo's capital Kinshasa since 2017 and was made ambassador in 2019. He was married and had 3 young daughters, according to his Facebook page. He was an enthusiastic young diplomat with a great sensitivity to social problems, said Mauro Garafola at the Sant'Egidio charity based in Rome. He closely followed our work such as our program to help HIV/AIDS sufferers. The driver, Milambo, leaves behind 4 children, said Jean Maubert Sanga, a Congolese rights activist. He joins thousands of Congolese who have lost their lives in this region, including on this road, and whose tragedies rarely make the headlines and comments from politicians in Kinshasa, he said on Twitter. Exclusive. U.S. plays down Iran rhetoric, waits to see if Tehran resumes talks. Washington. A U.S. official played down comments by the Iranian Supreme Leader on Monday that Tehran could enrich uranium to 60% purity, saying that would be concerning, but Iran has not done so yet and Washington is waiting to see if Tehran will return to talks. The United States on Thursday offered to sit down with the Iranians along with other parties to a 2015 nuclear deal to see if there is a way to return to the pact abandoned by former U.S. President Donald Trump. The crux of the deal was that Iran would limit its uranium enrichment program to make it harder to amass the fissile material for a nuclear weapon, an ambition it has long denied, in return for relief from U.S. and other economic sanctions. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said Tehran may enrich uranium up to 60% purity if the country needed it, state TV reported, adding that Tehran will never yield to the U.S. pressure over its nuclear work. Iran has responded to Trump's abandonment of the nuclear deal and restoration of U.S. sanctions by reducing its own compliance, including by enriching uranium up to 20%, above the pact's 3.67% limit but well below the 90% that is weapons grade. Until you get back to talks, both sides are going to take positions to elevate the tone. But I don't know that we need to focus on that. Let's see whether they agree to come back to the table, said the U.S. official, speaking on condition of anonymity. The White House said U.S. allies in Europe are still waiting for Iran to respond to the European Union's offer to host talks among parties to the nuclear deal, which included Iran, Britain, China, France, Germany, Russia, and the United States. There is no doubt that if we don't reach an understanding, they will continue to expand their nuclear program, whether it's what he says they will do minus 60% or something else, said the U.S. official. Both sides are now accumulating leverage, whether it's them with their nuclear steps, or us with the sanctions that have been imposed. That's not really helping either side, the U.S. official added. It would be very concerning to Washington if Iran enriched to 60%, but it had not yet done so, the official said. The United States wants to find a way so that neither side feels a need to escalate but to the contrary wants to get back to the place where both sides are in compliance, the official added. In a sign Iran plans to further reduce its compliance, Iran said on Monday it will end at 2030 GMT the implementation of the additional protocol that allows the UN nuclear watchdog to carry out snap inspections at sites not declared to the agency, the semi-official Tasnim news agency reported. The UN nuclear watchdog said on Sunday it had struck an agreement with Iran to cushion the blow of steps Tehran plans to take this week, including an end to snap inspections, with both sides agreeing to keep necessary monitoring for up to 3 months. U.S. puts sanctions on 2 Myanmar generals over coup, Treasury Department. Washington Reuters. The United States on Monday imposed sanctions on 2 members of Myanmar's military junta over the country's February 1 coup. The Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control said the move took aim at Lieutenant General Mo Mint Tun and General Mong Mong Cho. The military must reverse its actions and urgently restore the democratically elected government in Burma, where the Treasury Department will not hesitate to take further action, the department said in a statement. The move freezes any U.S. assets of those blacklisted and generally bars Americans from dealing with them. Pakistan police popped their rollerblades on to catch Karachi's criminals. Karachi, Pakistan. Police in Pakistan's largest city, Karachi, are deploying an armed rollerblading unit to curb theft and harassment on its teeming streets. Gliding in a circle with their weapons pointed inwards and lifting and lowering the guns in unison, the 20-member unit clad in black undergoes rigorous training. We felt we needed to come up with an innovative approach to control street crime, said Farooq Ali, chief of the unit, explaining that officers on rollerblades could more easily chase thieves on motorcycles through the city of 20 million. Ali conceded that rollerblading police could not be deployed across many parts of Karachi due to the poor road conditions and uneven footpaths, but said they would be sent to public places with a higher incidence of theft and harassment. This is just the beginning, said Anila Aslam, a policewoman on the unit. This rollerblading will really benefit us. With this training, we can reach narrow alleys very quickly where it is usually difficult to go. Safety concerns were raised when initial footage of the Karachi unit's training showed officers carrying heavier weapons, but Ali said the unit would only carry handguns, reducing the risk of bullets ricocheting. The rollerblading police, who follow in the footsteps of similar units in Europe and elsewhere, are expected to begin officially next month, but they were recently spotted outside the venue of the Pakistan Super League cricket tournament. And they have already begun patrolling Karachi's bustling beachfront. Seeing them here in clean uniform since the morning gives us a sense of security, as even in daytime, snatchings occur here, said pedestrian Mohammed Azim. Canada's parliament passes motion saying China's treatment of Uyghurs is genocide. Ottawa, Canada's parliament passed a non-binding motion on Monday saying China's treatment of the Uyghur Muslim minority in the Xinjiang region constitutes genocide, putting pressure on Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government to follow suit. Canada's House of Commons voted 266-0 for the motion brought by the opposition Conservative Party. Trudeau and his cabinet abstained from the vote, although Liberal backbenchers widely backed it. The motion was also amended just before the vote to call on the International Olympic Committee to move the 2022 Winter Olympics from Beijing if the treatment continues. Trudeau's Conservative rivals have been pressuring him to get tougher on China. after Canada arrested Huawei chief financial officer Meng Wanzhou in 2018 on a U.S. warrant. China detained 2 Canadians on spying charges, igniting lingering diplomatic tensions between the two countries. China has been widely condemned for setting up complexes in Xinjiang that it describes as vocational training centers to stamp out extremism and give people new skills, and which others have called concentration camps. Beijing denies accusations of abuses in Xinjiang. Citing testimony documents and media reports of human rights abuses against Uyghurs, conservative lawmaker Michael Chong said, "We can no longer ignore this. We must call it for what it is, a genocide." Trudeau has been reluctant to use the word genocide, suggesting that seeking broad consensus among Western allies on Chinese human rights issues would be the best approach. Moving forward multilaterally will be the best way to demonstrate the solidarity of Western democracies that are extremely concerned and dismayed by reports of what's going on in Xinjiang, Trudeau said on Friday after speaking to fellow G7 leaders. Trudeau and U.S. President Joe Biden will hold a virtual bilateral meeting on Tuesday afternoon, and relations with China are likely to be discussed, a government source said. Former U.S. President Donald Trump, on his last full day in office last month, said China had committed genocide and crimes against humanity by repressing Uyghur Muslims. The Biden administration is trying to ensure that the genocide declaration is upheld, according to his pick to be ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. Kong Peivu, the Chinese ambassador to Ottawa, denied accusations of genocide. Western countries are in no position to say what the human rights situation in China looks like, Kong said in an interview before the vote. There is no so-called genocide in Xinjiang at all. Delays rattle asylum seekers waiting in Mexico as hopes of quick U.S. entry fade. Monterrey, Mexico. The United States abruptly canceled plans on Monday to bring asylum seekers into Texas at 2 ports of entry, dashing the hopes of hundreds who have been waiting for months in Mexico under a Trump-era policy President Joe Biden promised to unwind. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, said in a statement that given current operational considerations, it could no longer say when it would begin bringing in migrants through ports in Brownsville and El Paso, Texas. The department said last week it would start accepting asylum seekers with active cases at those locations on Monday and Friday, respectively. Texas is recovering from a winter storm that knocked out power and water services across the state. A DHS spokeswoman did not give a specific reason for the delay, but said the agency would begin to use those locations once international partners implemented certain measures to ensure security, health and adequate processing systems. Biden pledged to roll back the Trump-era program known as the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, which forced more than 65,000 mostly Central American asylum seekers back across the border pending U.S. immigration court hearings. Most returned home, but some stayed in Mexico in sometimes squalid or dangerous conditions, vulnerable to kidnapping and other violence. The Biden administration has said it will first seek to deal with about 25,000 people with active cases, and the United Nations has set up a website for people to register. "We are really confused because we don't see any change. We are just looking for help," said Josue Cornejo, a migrant from Honduras who has been stuck in a makeshift camp in Matamoros, Mexico, across the border from Brownsville, for over a year. "They aren't telling us anything," he said in a video message. The effort to reverse the program started slowly on Friday at a port of entry in San Ysidro, California, where so far 50 asylum seekers have been processed, according to Democratic Representative Nanette Barragan, who visited the border. In recent days, several hundred migrants have amassed across the border in Tijuana, many of them not in the MPP program but hoping to be allowed to enter the United States. The migrants include some families with small children and people setting up tents. U.S. officials say anyone who seeks to enter and does not have an active MPP case will be immediately expelled under COVID-era rules. A UN official said on Monday that the organization has registered more than 7,700 migrants with active cases since Friday. The official said asylum seekers in the Matamoros camp could be processed in coming days. The global body is also tasked with testing migrants for COVID-19 in Mexico before they arrive at U.S. ports of entry, while nonprofits on the U.S. side are providing shelters for migrants to quarantine upon arrival. Mark Manley, a UN official in Mexico, told Reuters on Friday that the website ran slowly at times, but called it teething problems. U.S.'s Blinken stresses two-state solution to Palestinian conflict in call with Israeli minister. Washington. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told his Israeli counterpart on Monday that a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was best for the future of Israel, the U.S. State Department said. Blinken, in a call with Israeli Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi, emphasized the Biden administration's belief that the two-state solution is the best way to ensure Israel's future as a Jewish and democratic state, living in peace alongside a viable and democratic Palestinian state, the State Department said. EU to sanction 4 Russians over Navalny, including prosecutors. Brussels, European Union foreign ministers agreed on Monday to impose sanctions on 4 senior Russian officials close to President Vladimir Putin in a mainly symbolic response to the jailing of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. The agreement, which is expected to be formally approved by the EU in early March, came after France, Germany, Poland and the Baltic states urged the 27-member bloc to send a message to Putin that debate and protest must be allowed in Russia. Navalny was arrested after returning to Moscow last month from Germany, where he had been recovering from a near-fatal poisoning in Siberia with what Western nations said was a nerve agent. His arrest sparked protests across Russia. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said the decision was taken to go ahead with sanctions quickly, but gave no details. The relations with Russia are certainly at a low, there is no other word for it, Maas said. One EU diplomat said the proposed new travel bans and asset freezes would target, among others, Alexander Bostrykin, whose investigative committee handles investigations into major crimes and reports directly to Putin. Bostrykin is already under British human rights sanctions. Also to be targeted, the diplomat said, is Igor Krasnov, who became Russia's prosecutor general a year ago. The third official on the draft list is Viktor Zolotov, head of Russia's National Guard, who publicly threatened Navalny with violence in September 2018. The fourth man named by the diplomat is Alexander Kalashnikov, head of the Federal Prison Service. The sanctions will be imposed under a new framework that allows the EU to take measures over human rights violators worldwide, EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell told reporters. He said he hoped the sanctions would be ready in about a week. The EU has already sanctioned 6 Russians and a state scientific research center in response to the treatment of Navalny oligarchs. The proposed new listings fall far short of the demands made by Navalny's allies, who have drawn up a list of 35 people including members of Russia's business leaders, the so-called oligarchs, they want to see targeted. EU governments say sanctions against senior state officials can better withstand legal challenges, while it is more difficult to prove business executives' involvement in any human rights abuses. Before the EU meeting, Leonid Volkov, a senior Navalny aide, said in Brussels that sanctions against oligarchs might be a way to weaken Putin if they came to feel that association with the president was more of a liability than a source of protection. But Volkov welcomed Monday's decision. Even if it's too little, it's the first time personal sanctions are applied with regard to human rights violations, so it opens a way for further negotiation on this with Europe, he said. Navalny says the Kremlin was behind last August's poisoning, but it denies this. He was jailed on February 2 for violating the terms of parole on what he says was a politically motivated conviction. He lost an appeal on Saturday. Russia accuses the EU of meddling in its affairs. It leveled the same accusation against the European Court of Human Rights, which is not an EU body, after it also demanded Navalny's release in a ruling on February 17. Pressure in Europe for new sanctions has grown since Moscow expelled German, Polish and Swedish diplomats on February 5 without telling Borrell, who was visiting Moscow at the time. Russian hockey star targeted for support of Kremlin critic Navalny, NHL team says. Moscow. The National Hockey League's New York Rangers said on Monday that star forward Artemy Panarin was being targeted for his support of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny by what it called a fabricated report alleging he assaulted a woman a decade ago. Panarin, 29, is one of the few elite Russian athletes openly critical of President Vladimir Putin. He has publicly backed Navalny, who was jailed this month on what the opposition politician said were politically motivated charges. This is clearly an intimidation tactic being used against him for being outspoken on recent political events, the NHL team said in a statement. Artemy is obviously shaken and concerned and will take some time away from the team. The New York Rangers said Panarin, who was a finalist last season for the league's Most Valuable Player award, vehemently and unequivocally denies the allegations against him. The statement comes after former NHL player Andrei Nazarov, who briefly coached Panarin in Russia, told the Sports.ru website that Panarin had been detained after beating up an 18-year-old woman at a hotel bar in Riga in Latvia in 2011. Nazarov has in the past been critical of Panarin's support for Navalny. Burma. Hundreds of thousands of demonstrators, despite threats from the junta. Yangon. Hundreds of thousands of people demonstrated in Burma on Monday to once again denounce the military coup, defying the junta which warned the protesters that they risked perishing. The power had brandished Sunday this threat to use lethal force to end anarchy, at the end of a weekend mourning the death of 3 demonstrators and marked by the funeral of a young woman who had succumbed to his injuries on Friday. Despite this, 3 weeks after the February 1st putsch and the arrest of the former head of the civilian government, Aung San Suu Kyi, the mobilization in favor of democracy has not weakened, with, in addition to daily demonstrations, a campaign of disobedience. Civil disruption that disrupts the functioning of the state and the economy. Internationally, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called on the Burmese army to immediately stop the repression. The demonstrators are urging people, especially teenagers and exalted young people, to embark on the path of confrontation where they will perish, authorities warned on Sunday evening in a statement read on the channel Public Television MRTV. Warning to the junta: unlike 1988, the actions of the security forces are recorded and you will have to account, replied on Twitter the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Burma, Tom Andrews. In Brussels, the EU decided on Monday to sanction the military responsible for the coup, announced the head of European diplomacy Josep Borrell. The EU foreign ministers have decided on targeted sanctions against the economic and financial interests of the military, because in this country they are entrepreneurs and are holders of parts of the economy, he said. A political agreement has been found to sanction the military and technical work has been launched to finalize the sanctions and have them adopted, a diplomatic source said. Calls for civil disobedience. Despite the risks involved, hundreds of thousands of people marched through the streets of Yangon, Myanmar's largest city, on Monday. We are here today to join in the protest and fight until we win, said Cho Cho, a 23-year-old student. We are worried about the crackdown, but we will continue. We are so angry. The residents of Yangon saw a strengthening of security arrangements on Monday, with the deployment of many police and army trucks while roadblocks were erected near the embassy district. The military have unjustly seized power in the elected civilian government, a 29-year-old protester denounced on condition of anonymity. We will fight until we get our freedom, democracy and justice. Other large gatherings also took place in the capital Naypyidaw as well as in Mandalay, the second largest city in Burma, Myitkyina, north, and Dawei, south. Many markets and shops have remained closed in Rangoon and other cities, after calls for a general strike to amplify the movement of civil disobedience. On Sunday, the Burmese paid tribute to the first person who lost her life in direct connection with the military repression, a young grocer who became an icon of the resistance against the junta. The funeral of Maya Thwait Kang, who was shot to the head and died on Friday after 10 days in intensive care, took place on the outskirts of Naypyidaw, in the presence of several thousand people. On Saturday there were 2 deaths in Mandalay when police fired on the crowd and a 30-year-old man was killed in Yangon. To the massive protests against their coup, the Burmese military responded by gradually deploying more security forces, which further resorted to rubber bullets, tear gas, water cannons and sometimes even gunfire. Real. According to the Association for Aid to Political Prisoners, a total of 684 people have been arrested since the putsch. The new power has in particular in its sights the railway workers, civil servants and bank employees who have stopped working in solidarity with the opposition to the junta. Don't forget to comment below with your common sense and subscribe to your podcast. This helps bring the podcast to life and grow it. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We can't wait to continue this adventure with you. Support us on PayPal. Thank you very much and enjoy listening.